Okay, so clear ang PowerPoint?
Yes, sir.
Okay, let's
Opo.
continue ha. Sorry, Kim, I think sobraan ko explicar sa because subject. Okay, so let's begin with human rights governance in the Philippines. So this will help us learn what are the types of human rights that are being governed in the Philippines or what institutions are present with respect to handling human rights here in the Philippines. Actually, ganahan ko sa obra diri, oh. It's a very good portrayal of human rights. It speaks of volumes. I am actually into art. I love watching painting or any of the kind of stuff. Anyway, overview. This topic covers the various human rights instruments ratified by the Philippines as signatory to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. In ani maging sa class, you all know that the Universal Declaration of Human Rights are not of Philippine origin, right? So kaning UDHR gikan ni sa ubang nasod, and this is being promulgated by the United Nations. Now, kani siyang UDHR are a set of standard rights that should be present in a certain country para maingon nato na we are compliant with what is being asked of us for in terms of human rights. Now, since we are a signatory to the United Nations, we are also a signatory to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. That means kung unsa ang promulgate internationally for human rights with respect to UDHR, dapat i-follow po nato. Now, in order for the Philippines to follow these set of standards set forth by the UDHR, we need to ratify it. When you say ratify, i-approve through our government system that these set of rights will form part as our laws here in the Philippines. So more na siya, meaning sa ratification. There is a need to ratify the instruments promulgated by the UDHR. So we have here the definition of terms. When you say conventions, these are formal agreements which are legally binding on contracting states, also referred to as a treaty. When you say a treaty, agreement, kasunduan, mutual understanding, MU, between Party A and Party B. UN Human Rights Office of the High Commissioner. This is a UN agency responsible for promoting and protecting human rights. Ratification. This is the action of signing or giving formal consent to a treaty, contract, or agreement, making it officially valid. Now, here in the Philippines, before we, if there is a certain set of standards being introduced to us which are not of Philippine origin, it is the president who signs such agreement to become part of it. And it is the job of the legislative department through the Senate to ratify it. Meaning to give formal consent na kung sa itong gisign ni Presidente will become a part of our Philippine laws. Now, you have various international conventions or agreements or treaties promulgated by the UDHR. I will only discuss the first five kay mo ni siya ang pinaka-dagko of among them. So, you have the list there of your different conventions or treaties which we are a signatory to, and hence it has been a part of the Philippine laws because we are signatories to such conventions. The first one is the International Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discriminations. So ICERD, or ICERD, whatever you call that. It was adopted on December 21, 1965. I, anyway, before I continue, klaro ba ko tingog?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Hello? Hello? Can everyone hear me?
Klaro man, sir.
Okay, sorry. Sige, sige.
Yes, sir.
Opo.
So the ICARD was adopted on December 21, 1965, and it upholds that the existence of racial barriers is repugnant to the ideals of any human society. Meaning, if we continue to put discrimination in terms of race, then it will human society will not evolve. Human society will remain what? Ignorant. Now, it seeks to combat all forms of racial discrimination. So when you say racial discrimination, it is defined as any distinction, exclusion, restriction, or preference based on race, color, descent, national or ethnic origin, which has the purpose or effect of nullifying or impairing recognition, enjoyment, or exercise on an equal footing of human rights and fundamental freedoms in the political, economic, social, cultural, or any other field of public life. As a matter of fact, I was once a victim of racial discrimination. There was a time in sometime in 2002, my family and I went to the United States, specifically in Washington, D.C., because we went there to become as tourists. So, lagay man ni akong mamagpapa. So, we went there on tour together with our relatives. And then, we tried to aboard the subway station. A subway station is a train found underground. That is the mode of transportation there in the US. So, wala kayo makita na train sa taas, cars lang, but below it, sa ilalom, diha ang main transportation mo. So, when we entered the subway station, this particular Caucasian na security guard stopped us. He said, I can remember it clearly. He said, "You are not allowed to enter here because you are not my regular clients." So mo to ni bagting tiniling ako ang tita. Yan na siya. What do you mean we are not your regular clients? We are as a matter of fact, we are tourists. We are paying taxes and we are adding economic growth to your country. By prohibiting us, you are destroying your own economy. You are basta yaw-yaw gid akong tita dito sa kalagot naan ba. Igdawin niyo na gani. Amo nga Caucasian siguro hadlok da kay basin ihurim-huriman dayan daunan ba or basin siguro ing kanato Siryahan kay Minandaya amo nang Muslim hadlok man yung mga puti ng kanato Dixon kay amo nang minuslim man so amo nga piyasod na lang kami. So it was my first time to feel racially discriminated. So tinuod gyud ni racial discrimination. Alam kay mga lagom man pud mi ato eh. Hindi pa uso ang gluta ato sa ahon ba. So anyway, that is one example of racial discrimination. So we were deprived of riding the subway. We were excluded from the rest of the populace because we are of color, because we are brown colored. So according to the security guard, you are not allowed here because you are not white, you are of color, and you should not enjoy riding on the subway na kaluwi sa mga manday wa makasakay ng subway. But anyway, kasakay gyapon kami kay amo nga yaw-yaw naman ka naktiya. So moto. So under this ICAR, the rights identified are equal treatment before tribunals, right to security of person, political rights, civil rights, right to access services for public use, right to access services to use the subway station. Wa kami pasud kay laong nila we are not their regular customers. So anyway, at any rate, moving on. International Convention on Civil and Political Rights, or ICCPR. So this was adopted on December 16, 1966. And it states that by virtue of that right, they freely determine their political status and freely pursue their economic, social, and cultural development. These rights pertain to life, prohibition on torture, slavery, forced labor, fair trial, and freedom of thought. So it encompasses a lot of rights, this ICCPR. So that's why right now we have our laws against prohibition on torture. As a matter of fact, every month, all COPs within my jurisdiction are executing an affidavit which informs us that in their certain municipal police stations, there are no torture chambers, there are no anything which tends to promote torture on the part of the detainees. So nag-execute sila ng affidavit sa kuan, nagapromisa na wala sila yung mga ingani, na dili nila gina-torture ilahang mga priso, wala sila ginabuhat na forced labor or anything of that like. So at least so as long as we are a signatory, as long as we are a signatory to these conventions, we are required to perform what is being asked from the convention. Hence, this should form part of our way of life, especially in the government system. Nasabtan, class? Lo. Ayo.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Uy, tubag mo ba kaya? Actually, no, makulbaan ko sa inyo ba pag di mo mangutahan na. Sige. International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. So ICESCR. Adopted again on December 16, 1966. It provides assurance of equal right of men and women to the enjoyment of all economic, social, and cultural rights. So rights involve work mostly, which is favorable conditions at work, the ability to form unions, strike, adequate standard of living, and standard of health. You can freely see this in your Department of Labor, wherein people from the work sector are allowed to form unions so that they can voice out what they feel like voicing out. Like for example, the need to raise their salary, the need to raise the conditions at work. Now, what else? Favorable conditions at work. It is a standard basic. It is a standard labor that your workplace should be favorable when it comes to working conditions. Meaning, pag ikaw empleyado ka sa isang korporasyon o sa isang kumpanya, kung asa ka man nila gilabay para magtrabaho, dapat ka ng imuhang area diha is favorable or meaning like in a way conditional siya para makatrabaho kag tarong. Dili kay ilabay ka diha sa daghan kay aso-aso ng mga fumes unya malanghap nimo ng fumes unya magkasakit ka kana. That is what is not being promoted. Unsa pa, the right to strike, the right to grieve against your own company because you feel like you are being thrown at the side of the wall because you feel like kulang imuhang salary, kulang ang imuhang benefits as a worker. So this is what being promulgated by ICESCR. Next is the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. So, adopted on December 18, 1979, it upholds the equality of rights of men and women in line with the existing international covenants on human rights. So, it is against discrimination against women. So, when you say discrimination against women, it means any distinction, exclusion, or restriction made on the basis of sex, which has the effect of purpose or impairing or nullifying the recognition, enjoyment, or exercise by women. For example, previously, the work of lawyers, it used to be of the environment. It used to be all men, but now women are becoming lawyers. As a matter of fact, women are becoming better lawyers than men. So here, there is an improvement in our society because we allow now women to become lawyers, not like unlike before, which wherein it was predominantly male. So at least there is an improvement when it comes to better opportunities for women. Or for example, in the police department, before when you say public safety, it has to be the role of men, right? Because men tend to be strong, allegedly men tend to be stronger when it comes to physical prowess, right? But now again, then again, women now are allowed to enter the police service because we are into not discriminating women when it comes to work. So that's why we have an increase of influx of women joining the police department. So the rights embodied here are of gender equality, ensure women development, gender equity in political and civil endeavors, education, employment, healthcare, among others. Any questions so far? And napansin ako, in municipal police stations, it is the women who handle, or the police officers who are women who handle sensitive cases such as rape, such as violence against women and children. So I think that is being handled by the women's desk, right? So I think you need women there because you need a woman's touch in order to perform that job. It will be difficult if ang lalaki ang butang nimo diha unya ang nang rape kay lalaki. So there is an off balance of off balance of the environment. So you have to change it to women because ang women nga has this ability to be nurturing. So mo na we put women there in the women's help desk. Any questions so far? Wala? Sure ha? Convention Against Torture and Other Cruel, Inhuman, or Degrading Treatment or Punishment. Meron ka. Convention Against Torture siguro. Anyway, adopted on December 10, 1984, it upholds that no one shall be subjected to torture or to cruel or inhuman or degrading treatment or punishment. So under this, the torture was defined as any act which by severe pain or suffering, whether physical or mental, is intentionally inflicted on a person for such purposes as obtaining from him or a third person information or a confession, intimidating or coercing him for any reason based on discrimination of any kind, when such pain or suffering is inflicted by or at the instigation of or with the consent of a public official. Meaning, torture happens when there is physical and mental pain being subjected to you because that pain tends to lead to information or a confession. And this has been what? Tolerated by a certain public official or employee. So that is what you call a torture. Now the rights being protected here are prohibition to return of a return of a person when there is danger of torture in the home country, torture as a crime or legal offense, victims may obtain redress and compensation. I have one example. I have one dear friend who was um, she was at the highest position in her congregation, but what happened was she was the victim, almost a victim of rape. So what they did was they pressed charges against their leader. But their leader is so influential that the leader can control the, I'm sorry to say, the police and some government officials. So what they did was they left the Philippines. So they left the country and sought asylum in the United States. So in the United States, they were able to address their problems. They were able to inform the US that this certain person has tried to rape us, tried to manipulate us. So ang gibuhat sa US is giun sila gis, hatagan sila asylum, gipa-stay sila sa US because the US knows that once if they return here in the Philippines, they will be subjected to torture. So mauto. So at least, di ba, the United States is a member of the UN, so they were able to provide this convention to a certain friend of mine who was a victim of such cruelty. Nila ko ingon kung kinsa because very sensitive ang case. Now, institutional setting of human rights. Before we move on, any questions so far? Any violent reaction or any epiphany or anything that you would like to share based on the lecture?
Ako wala ko ma-share.
Pero masabtan ninyo class or usa ba?
Sabtan, sir.
Sabtan, okay.
Masabtan man, sir.
Okay, so yeah. Now let's move on to institutional setting of human rights. Now you have to learn certain terms. The NHRI or the National Human Rights Institution. These are institutions created for the promotion and protection of human rights, especially those who are vulnerable and in the marginalized groups. We also have here the Paris Principles. These principles, which tend to enlighten the function of national human rights institutions, they serve as standards or help NHRIs how to perform their job. Now, your NHRI here in the Philippines is the Commission on Human Rights, the CHR. So it is your primary human rights institution, CHR. Created under the 1987 Constitution, the CHR was established through Executive Order number 163 on May 5, 1987. So in a nutshell or in summary, the CHR is tasked to investigate human rights violations among vulnerable groups. Now, question, anong karon lang man 1987 Constitution na establish ang Commission on Human Rights? Because the 1987 Constitution would like to address the problems that happened during the Marcos era. During the Marcos era, there were a lot of violations in terms of human rights. So, after sa era ni Marcos, it wants to remedy what has been damaged or what continues to be present in terms of violations of human rights. So that's why it was created under the 1987 Constitution or right after the martial law. Kaya para makaprovide og investigation, makaprovide og remedy as to those victims of violations of human rights. Muna, sa 1987 na siya nag-constitute. So, here is a picture of your NHRI, Komisyon sa mga Karapatang Pantao. So, NHRIs have specific functions. First, they take charge of handling and facilitating human rights complaints. Second, they promote access to information through human rights education. And lastly, they are tasked to provide legal form recommendations as necessary. So not only are they an office which tends to handle complaints, but they also help you provide in terms of legal actions as against those who tend to step on your rights. So apart from that, they also educate people on what your rights are in order for these people to be aware of what they can ask or what they are available for them. So if you can see in the picture, there you have their Gascon who just passed away recently. And in the far right, you have their, I think these are indigenous people. I think they are trying to address their problems with respect to ancestral lands. So kana, this is also being covered by the Commission on Human Rights when it comes to ancestral domains because um, ancestral domains are being giilugan sa mga those who would like to make it a business enterprise and those on the side of the indigenous people to retain it as a hollow ground because of nga tungod sila kanunuan. Now, what are the Paris Principles? The Paris Principles serve as guide to the functions of the NHRI. So the UN adopted the Paris Principles. These principles guide the function and affairs of the NHRI. So the Paris Principles uphold that NHRIs should, so in short, ang Paris Principle nagamando sa atuang Commission on Human Rights to be, first, you have to be independent of the government. Why? You have to be independent of the government because you are a quasi-judicial body and you need to stand on your own, because if the government influences you to be part of its subsidiary, then wala ka independence. You cannot you cannot hold investigations against the government. May mo na kang dependent hinoon sa gobyerno. Second, be pluralistic in their roles and membership, meaning you have to add on more roles in trying to destroy those who tend to deviate from what is being allowed in your or what is being deprived of from your human rights. So you have to diverse your roles in order for you to cater all problems relating to human rights. Third, capable of promoting all aspects of the convention through various means, including recommendations and proposals. So the fact na naanay convention does not mean that it is not subject to being amended. That's the reason why NHRIs are present is because pwede pa nila i-evaluate whether or not ito na convention is still applicable to the setting, or does it need to improve in order to address the present problem. Fourth, have adequate powers of investigation. Kinahanglan gini. In order for you to freely investigate, must have adequate powers of investigation, meaning you are given the right to freely snoop around, to look at papers, to freely access documents in order for you to properly investigate the case at hand. Fifth, regular functioning institution, of course. How will you defend human rights if you are not a regular functioning institution? Kung saan naka-display, di ba? Sixth, adequately funded and not subject to financial control. If you remember correctly, Gascon was threatened by our dear president that ang inyuhang budget lang kay 1 million na kaluoy po, no? So, mauna. But I think that was just on the part of our president, I think that was just him trying to tell the Commission on Human Rights to be fair in your investigations, because not all of you are fair in terms of reporting your investigations. Some of you tend to be one-sided. When you report, Manggod, you have to take a look at the whole picture and not just one side of it. And lastly, accessible to the general public. Of course, it is the general public who tend to be the victims of human rights and not those who are on the pedestal, or katong mga dato, katong mga matriarcha. Hindi mo sila. It's the general public who are victims, not the monarchs, not those who are in the higher ups. So klaro ang Paris Principles, ha? Ayo.
Opo, sir.
All right, human rights in the Philippine law enforcement. So, definition of terms. When you say equal protection, everyone is entitled to the law without discrimination on any grounds, especially against violence and other threats. Respectful treatment, treat all citizens and victims of crime with compassion and respect. Use of force, do not use force, except when necessary and to the minimum extent required under the circumstances. Arresting persons on legal grounds, you may only arrest persons only if you have a legal ground to do so, and the arrest is carried out in accordance with lawful arrest procedures, meaning when you try to arrest a person, it should be in accordance with what is being described in the law or what is being given by the law. Lastly, detainees' rights. Ensure that all detainees immediately after arrest have access to their family and lawyer. They must also be given immediate medical assistance whenever necessary. Now, just because ang imong akusado committed a crime does not mean na dili mo siya hatagag rights. Of course, all the more na siya hatagan mo siya rights because siya ang dehado. It's not you. Plus, um, if you remember it correctly, if you remember our previous lesson, di ba? You should, although an accused is trying to be, ina-try na ko siya for his crime, you have to maintain respect and dignity on his part. And that is what is being enshrined in some of our laws. Now, they must also be given immediate medical assistance whenever necessary. Now, this is already the practice of the municipal stations of Boston, Katiil, and Baganga. Pag naa sila yung madakop by virtue of a warrant or by virtue of a warrantless arrest, pag naa sila yung madakop, iagi yun na nila sa municipal health office. This is to check whether or not the accused or the respondent is fit to be detained in a prison or in a detention facility. May napun na, at least, di ba? Holistic ang approach na to when it comes to detainees rights. Plus, we are human rights-based ang approach na to when it comes to handling detainees or accused or respondents. Napalay into the All right, so in the performance of duties as law enforcement agents, it is vital, if not unavoidable, to feed the principle of human rights, particularly in approaching an apprehended or arrested person. Because when we arrest a person, there is a tendency that we might trample on their rights. So the study of human rights goes hand in hand with the law enforcement in the sense that every person, whether accused of a crime or not, is entitled to dignity and respect. Now, the connection of the study of human rights to law enforcement activities is to regulate the movements of law enforcement agents through a human rights-based approach in dealing with arrested persons, detainees, and other similar situations. Now, the reason why you need to study this is because when you become police officers, you become members of the law enforcement department. And when you are law enforcers, you tend to arrest persons. And when you arrest persons, there is that slight conflict or slight chance that you may trample on their rights. So that's why there is a need for you to study this para to prepare you on what is in the outside world and how to help you not trample on these rights. Now, the protection of human rights is essentially a matter of learning and understanding the basic human rights of a person and acting in accordance with those rights in dealing with every individual, whether the law enforcement side or the citizen side. This means that human rights must come from both ends. The law enforcement agent must respect the rights and dignity of the person they're in contact with, and of course, the citizen must respect your authority and dignity as law enforcement agent. In short, magrespetuhay mo. The citizen should respect you as the authority, and you as the one with the authority respect what is the rights of that person. Now, the state has obligations in terms of human rights. It has the obligation to respect human rights, to protect human rights, and to fulfill human rights. When you say respect, you should refrain from illegal and disproportionate actions, meaning avoid unjustified interferences such as the right to privacy and sanctity of a home. So for example, daghan kaayo kong complaints regarding illegal gambling, but the gambling happened inside their house. So, hindi na ako mag-guess ganing mga police officers, gidakop ni sila under the sanctity of their home. Di ba, you cannot just barge inside the house and arrest these people who are allegedly illegally gambling, because under the 1987 Constitution, you have the right to be secure or safe and be private in your own house. So mo na automatic pag mag-file ka ng police sa kuha before the office, yung makita na ko sa ebidensya na so ni gidakop ninyo sulod sa balay when nagadulat sila katpiat. Yes sir. Dismiss. Automatic because that is already an interference on their right to privacy and sanctity of a home. What else? To protect human rights, meaning all branches of the government, executive, legislative, and judicial, must ensure that the rights to every human being is being protected. How do we do this? So executive, we execute the laws um, pertaining to human rights. Legislative, they should create laws that should uphold the human rights, and the judicial, meaning they should learn. The judicial should take part in determining whether or not the actions of a certain individual is within the boundary of what is being allowed by the law. For example, kamo, when you arrest a certain person, it is the judiciary who will determine whether or not tama ba ang inyuhang pagdakop or is it void. And lastly, fulfill human rights. The state must take positive action to facilitate the enjoyment of basic human rights. Alangan, since it is the job of the state to protect us, and hence it must also give us the enjoyment of these human rights. Any questions so far? No questions?
No, sir.
Okay, police obligations in human rights. So when a police officer arrests a suspect, he or she is interfering with that suspect's human right to personal liberty and security. Hence, the basis for interfering or deprivation of liberty brought about by arrest is to protect the life of others or to enforce the law, but at all times must have basis in the law. Meaning, when you arrest a person, you have to make sure that you have basis. You must have a legal ground in order to arrest that person. Now, one of the most crucial human rights involved, or one of the most crucial problem areas in terms of human rights, is this, the warrantless arrests, because it's such a wide spectrum area of problems which tend to clash on with the rights of the people, and it also clashes on the performance of the police officers. Now, what are warrantless arrests? So as a general rule, you may only arrest a person by virtue of a warrant. You cannot arrest a person kung wala kay warrant of arrest. But there are certain exceptions, and these are your exceptions, or these are your warrantless arrests, meaning you are allowed to arrest a person without a warrant. So please remember this, this will be the meat of your job when you become police officers. So Section 5 of Rule 113 states that these are the instances wherein you may be allowed to arrest a person without a warrant. So if you reduce that, it will be reduced into this. A warrantless arrest is lawful when it is in flagrante, when it is in hot pursuit, or when it involves an escapee. When you say in flagrante, the person or the respondent has committed, is committing, or attempting to commit an offense, and the police officer is there to see it that he is about to commit an offense. The hot pursuit is when you have just committed an offense and the arresting officer has personally knowledge of facts indicating that he has just committed the offense. And lastly, when a prisoner has escaped from the penal establishment. So you may, pag nakagawas ang preso, pwede mo siya dakpon without a warrant of arrest because he's already a prisoner. All he has to do is just serve his time. Any questions so far? Wala pangutana?
Wala, sir.
Wala. So you're okay. Now, what are the requisites in terms of in flagrante delicto? So how will you know if ang akusado pwede nimo siya dakpon by virtue of a warrantless arrest under in flagrante delicto? So first, you have to determine that the person to be arrested must execute an overt act indicating that he just committed, is actually committing, or is attempting to commit a crime. When you say overt act, nag-say action ba? na makitaan gyud nimo sa iyang lawas na kani siya mo himo gyud siya kababalaghan, mahimo gyud siya offense sa akong atubangan. And that such overt act is done in the presence or within the view of the arresting officer. So these are your requisites for you to be able to arrest a person without a warrant under in flagrante delicto. Now let's take the case of People versus Mengote, 210 SCRA 174. So what happened in this case? So on August 8, 1987, the police station received a telephone call from an informer saying that ay tulo ka suspicious looking persons diri sa Tondo. So ang gibuhat sa police station, nag-dispatch sila og mga patrolmen. So true enough, niadto tong patrolmen sa area sa Tondo and nakita sila duha ka tao na suspicious looking. Suspicious looking because sige silang tan-aw left and right ug naggunit sa ilahang tiyan. So mo duulan nila pagduol sa pulis sa mga katong suspicious looking individuals nanagaling suspicious individuals. So gipaligiran sa mga pulis sumoto ang nahitabo they were caught, they were arrested. And during their arrest, several items were recovered from them such as recover na gun and a knife. So the question here is, tama ba ang warrantless arrest? Valid ba ang warrantless arrest sa patrolmen? So the Supreme Court said the warrantless arrest was void, meaning mali ang inyong pagdakop sa ilaha. Wala mo'y basis. Why? He explains the court, the requirements under in flagrante delicto are, dapat ang person to be arrested has committed, is actually committing, or is at least attempting to commit an offense in front of the arresting officer. Now, if you take a look at the facts of the case, ang gihimo lang man sa mga suspicious looking people kay magtanaw left and right kung maggunit sa ilahang tiyan. Now, there is nothing wrong with that. That is not about to commit a crime kung mutanaw kang left to right o maggunit ka sa imong abdomen. Diba? So, since wala na meet ang criteria for in flagrante delicto, nag-ingon ang court, ang inyong warrantless arrest, void. Klaro, ang storya ni People versus Mengote. Ayo.
Sir,
Klaro ba ang kaso ni People versus Mengote?
Tubang.
Hello.
klaro sir.
Sure mo ha? Alright, next. Hot pursuit or katong second condition sa warrantless arrest. Unsa man ang iyang requisites. So first, there must be an offense that has just been committed and the person making the arrest has personal knowledge of the facts indicating that the person to be arrested has committed it. So ang hot pursuit, ang importante ani is dapat na ay immediacy or dapat na ay dapat short lang ang distance from the time the offense was committed and from the time the person is arrested. Okay, if dugay tong time if dugay ang lapse of time from the time the crime was committed and from the time of the arrest, then you have to file a warrant of arrest already. So let's take at the case of People versus Akol. So what happened in this case? So on September 29, 1990, kaning si Percival nag-drive sa iyang jeep. So naisakay siya ng duha ka tao and then another two individuals. So while riding, nag-stage og hold up ning upat ka tao. Upat ka men sa jeepney. So what they did was they nangawat sila mga kwarta, mga valuables from the passengers and nihunong sa isa ka area. So, ang gibuhat ni Percival o ang isa ka certain na tao na si Araneta, nagsumbong sila sa police station. So, ang police station nag-issue og dispatch, nag-dispatch og mga police. So, ang nahitabo kay ang mga police officers together with Percival and Araneta, giyuko nila tong nang hold up. Tapos nakitaan man ni Araneta na, sir, mao ni siya, kana siya tong nang hold up sa mga kay kanang iyang ginasuot na jacket, ako aman ng jacket. So mo to nadakop to silang upat. Karon ang pangutana is, valid ba ang arrest sa atong upat ka tawo na walay warrant? According to the Supreme Court, yes, the arrest or the warrantless arrest was valid. Why? Gi-explain sa Supreme Court na ang offense just happened or an offense has just been committed. And kaning police officers na nag-capture or nag-arrest sila has personal knowledge of the fact surrounding the circumstances because isumbong maning si Percival Tan o si Araneta sa ilaha. Plus, niingon pa yun si Araneta na, sir, kana siya na tao, muna siya ang ni kawat sa kuang jacket, isuot na niya. So, na-fulfill ang requirements sa hot pursuit. So, muna, ang arrest sa ilaha is valid. Any questions so far?
Wala, sir.
Wala. So, nasabta ng people versus Akol.
Opo.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Alright. Now, what are cases which will not fall within the hot pursuit due to lacking requirements? Meaning, these are example of cases na dili siya mag-fall under hot pursuit tungod wala nila na-meet ang requirements. So, in People versus Del Rosario, GR number 12775, ang offense happened a day before. So, ang gihimo sa police, gidakop nila atong akusado a day before after the offense. So, that is not well within hot pursuit kasi di ba dapat ang offense has just been committed? One day is not well within the ambit of the law, good. So, dapat na immediacy between the time the offense was committed and the time of the arrest. You know, one day na nilapse. Same with People versus Samus. Ang nahitabo na rin, gidakop na nila ang culprit 8 days after the incident happened. So, dili ka pwede maka-warrantless arrest sa iya kay 1 day o 8 days na ni labay eh. So, all you have to do is just, you should have filed a warrant of arrest against a certain person. Ito pa, Go versus Court of Appeals, 6 days after nila gi-arrest. So, warrantless arrest pa yun. Wala pa sila yung knowledge, personal knowledge sa fact na si Go de ani patay. So, somewhat, wag yun na-meet ang requirements sa hot pursuit. Ito pa, People versus Olivares, the warrantless arrest of the accused was done 2 days after the discovery of the crime. So, wala immediacy. So, dili siya mag-fall under hot pursuit. Kaning mga kasuhan eh. So, ang mga arrest nila is deemed to be void. Now, the question here is, so sir, how many, unsa mo dapat ang length of time para makaingon ta na apat sa hot pursuit? So, this has been answered in the case of People versus Rente. 219 SCRA 756. So here, ang mga policemen responded and saw that a victim died in the hospital and this victim was killed by a certain Herente. So when they were at the crime scene, they found instruments of death, meaning there was blood all over the area, there were commotions as evidenced by nagkabuang ang mga appliances dito or whatever, and napoy eyewitnesses na nakaingon na it was Herente who is one of the killers. So, moto, nag-hot pursuit ang mga police and they were able to find Herente within 3 hours. So, question sa court, is the warrantless arrest valid? According to the Supreme Court, valid ang arrest kay Herente because na ay personal knowledge ang policeman sa nahitabo na krimen. Second, na ay immediacy from the time the offense was committed and from the time that Herente was apprehended. And it was just only 3 hours. So mo na, gi-grant sa Supreme Court, okay, mo ni threshold, 3 hours from the time a person has just committed an offense and from the time a person has been apprehended may be allowed under warrantless arrest. Under hot pursuit. Nakuha.
Yes, sir.
Sure?
Opo.
Alright, so your application of human rights principles that call for protection and respect by police authorities. So you have certain rights under one area, and what should a police officer and should not do. So when it involves life, the police should take appropriate action in case of threats to life and property. And the police should not use excessive force, such as lethal force. So when the right to freedom from torture and ill treatment is being discussed, a police officer should act on domestic violence right away. And he should not intimidate during interrogation and use of excessive physical force. Now, when we talk about personal liberty and fair trial, a police officer should uphold and respect the right of the accused to be informed of the nature of the cause of arrest or accusation. And a police should not arrest a person without sufficient ground. Now, if a right involves the peaceful assembly, you as a police officer should maintain the peace and order during a strike or during an assembly. And as a police officer, you should not unlawfully disperse or display low or no tolerance to the strikers or those who would like to seek redress against the government. So these are just some of your guides on what to do should a right be involved. Any questions so far?
Wala, sir.
Sigurado mo? Sure mo?
Excuse me, sir.
Ah,
What happens, sir, if the police officer then like exercise more force than needed during interrogation?
okay. Sige. What happens to a police officer if he exercises too much force during interrogation? Then that is already considered as untoward torture, di ba?
Okay.
Okay, for example, when you arrest a person, you don't have to necessarily kanang ibundak gini mo siya sa floor, nga iyang kamot kay iputang nimo sa iyang likod, ana. If you feel like the accused or the respondent is kanang mo unsa ba mo muuyon sa imuhang authority as police officer, kanang mo sunod siya sa imuha, then you don't need necessary force. The mere fact na naa ka sa iyang side, the mere fact na willing siya mo magpa-under sa imuha is already enough because that is already restraint on the part of his freedom. Nakuha ninyo, guys?
Yes, sir. Like example, sir, kuan sir, ang kanang kuan niya, sir, kanang sa mga nahitabo karon sa Amerika kanang about sa racism. Di ba pag kanang ginadakop gani kanang murag gihinalaan pa lang ang kuan ba ang Black American kay di ko anan nila kanang too much force na ang ginagamit nila pag ginadakop nila. Tama ba na?
Exactly nga nung nag-erupt ng Black Lives Matter because wala gihatagan og due process ang mga respondents by the police officers. They immediately, like for example Nag-arrest sila without thinking, did he just commit an offense in front of me? Kani ba iyang gibuhat? Is it an offense and punishable under our laws? Wala sila isip ba? Ang gibuhat nila is biglaan sila nag-decide right then and there na basig dangerous ni siya. So that is already a racial discrimination because this only happens to black individuals and not to white or Caucasians. Napay pangutana?
Wala na, sir.
Sure. Mag-conduct ko kung sa ron. Recitation. Sige daw, be. But anyway, I would like to ask for your honest feedback whether or not nakasabot mo or wala. Because ako, actually, makulbaan yun ko masabot. Wala yung mangutana sa mga estudyante kay I have been remember, I have been a student for how many years? So I know how a student acts, how a student behaves. So kung pag wala kay mangutana, pakulbaan ko kay basig hadlok na ni sila mangutana or basig wala sa ikapangutana kay wala sa nasabtan sa ba?
Wala, sir, nakasabot ko. Kuya, it's just a case na kuan lang. Siguro, maayo lang jud to nga pulis mo interrogate mo lang. Nag-gets man ako yung mga kunto, sir. It's just a thing na wala na ako yung pangutana kay nasabot ako sa situation sa in my brain, sure. Na maayo lang siguro siya kasubrahan. Maayo siya mo interrogate mo rato. Katong sa naunta ko ipangutana pero circulate na ako idea. Siguro maayo ra tong tao mo interrogate katong pulis. Ang pangutana.
Okay. At any rate, ganun gamay lang mo ron. I think there are only 16 of you. May I know the reason why?
Sir, no.
Oh,
Excuse me, sir.
oo.
Na si PPT na siya ay PPT, sir, no?
Ha?
Na kanang discussion nimo karon, sir, na sa PPT karon, no?
Naay?
Pan ba kanang PPT?
What's FPT?
PowerPoint.
PowerPoint, sir.
Oo.
Okay, sige mo sir, kawala akong signal, sir. Mo nang putol-putol lang kuan nimo baka nang ganiyaw ako ka kuan.
Okay, PPT.
Mao pod murag wala ko ka question og kuan man naay kanang naay question na. Mo
Okay.
basahon na lang nako sa imong kuan, sir, PPT,
Okay,
sir.
sige. So, inganin na lang, siguro due to your problems of internet, pag naamoy wala na sabtan, please erase ninyo sa group chat ha, para matubag na ko og tarong. Ana na lang, okay?
Okay, sir.
Sige, so,
Thank you, sir.
napay pangutana or so, mag-end na ta.
To be honest, sir, choppy gid sir ang kuan. Putol-putol gid ang kuan.
Oh my
Klase.
God. Okay, sige. So magdepende lang mo sa notes ha. Na naman tanan dito gihatag nako. Thank you. At least now I know why wala pangutana because choppy on your part. Sige. All right. So okay na ta?
Yes, sir. Paabot na lang ni sir sa PowerPoint, sir,
Okay.
para makastudy ni.
All right, sige. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Okay.
Thank you po.
Okay.